Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own All Secrets Keep or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by Lisbeth_1, and you can find the link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by Celine.
All Secrets Keep, Chapter 20. Sarah ended up staying in the infirmary with Tally for the rest of the day. Colonel Wick wanted to keep Tally in for observation, much to Tally's annoyance, but Sarah had subsequently cancelled all her meetings for the day, and Tally couldn't bring herself to be annoyed at the prospect of spending the day with Sarah, even if she was confined to the infirmary. Sarah had stayed with Tally the entire day, leaving only for a little around lunchtime, when Abigail and Rael stopped by to visit with a change of clothes and some food they managed to sneak out of the mess hall. They filled Tally in on what was happening around campus in the aftermath of the Camarilla attack. Petra had fully recovered and was smoothing things over with Wade about the attack, and she was apparently being followed closely by a lieutenant who was worrying over her with every step. Abigail reported that tidbit with a frown on her face, but it was quickly replaced when she delightfully told Tally that she was the current topic of conversation around Fort Salem. Soldiers of all ranks had apparently been coming up with their own theories and reasons as to why the Camarilla would take Tally, of all people, and to Tally's mild distress, the most popular theory was the correct one. People were accurately guessing that she was involved with Sarah, although the guesses as to what extent their relationship went still varied. It was late in the day by the time that Colonel Wick finally released Tally from the infirmary. Sarah hovered around her protectively as she put on her boots and stood up. Sarah cautiously putting her hands out like she expected Tally to fall over at any moment. Tally rolled her eyes affectionately. "Sarah, I'm fine. I've been fine all day. I'm pretty sure I could have been released this morning, and I still would have been fine." It was Sarah's turn to roll her eyes as she followed Tally out the door of the infirmary into the cold air. "If you think that I was going to let you out of the infirmary before you had been cleared, then you must not know me very well." She glanced down at Tally and couldn't help the burst of affection that she felt in her chest as she watched Tally slip back into the combat jacket that she had given her the night before. A small smile tugged at her lips. "Do you like wearing that?" Tally looked up at her almost guiltily, like she had been caught doing something she shouldn't have been. There was a pink tinge to her face when she noticed Sarah's smile. "Yeah," she admitted, biting her lip. "It smells like you." The small smile that Sarah had been holding back broke out into a much larger grin, and she reached out for Tally, slipping her arm around her shoulders. She felt Tally stiffen under her touch, and she immediately pulled away, her own body stiffening in response. "What's wrong?" Tally glanced around nervously. There was no one else around them in the late evening, but the paths around the outside of Fort Salem were almost never completely empty. She stopped walking and turned to look at Sarah nervously. "People have been talking about us." Sarah sighed, looking down at the ground. "I know," she said softly. She looked back up, putting her hands behind her back. It became obvious to many of the higher-ups what was going on, the moment that they realized you had been taken and what the Camarilla were demanding of me. She saw Telly swallow, fidgeting with her hands nervously. "Does it bother you?" Sarah asked, equal parts nervous and curious as to why Telly seemed so skittish. "No," Telly said quickly, eyes widening. Her fingers curled into the cuffs of Sarah's borrowed jacket. "I am not ashamed or embarrassed to have people know that I love you. They can talk all they want about us." Her brown eyes were determined, fierce, and they caused Sarah's heart to stutter with their intensity. Sarah reached out to stroke Telly's cheek where the cut had once been, and watched Telly's eyelids flutter at the contact. "Are you sure? There will be lots of gossip, most of it unpleasant. People will be needlessly judgmental of you because of your association with me." Telly's eyes opened fully to once again fix Sarah with that intense gaze. "I don't care. I don't care what people think. None of that will matter as long as I am with you." Sarah felt another burst of affection at Telly's words, but she could still tell that something was bothering her. She slid her hand from Telly's cheek down her arm to grab her hand, taking it in her own. "Then what is bothering you?" Telly squeezed Sarah's hand tightly, taking a step closer as she shivered in the cold. "It's not anything bad. I'm just wondering," she flushed lightly, "since people know, do we have to continue to hide? Our relationship, I mean." Sarah lightly tugged on Telly's hand, drawing her closer. Telly allowed herself to be moved forward, watching Sarah with wide brown eyes. Sarah brought her free hand up to cup the back of Telly's neck, and she leaned down to kiss Telly. As soon as her lips brushed against Telly's, soft at first, then firmer, she felt the tension immediately drain from Telly's body. The kiss was short and sweet, Sarah pulling back to put both of her arms around Telly's waist properly, smiling. "Does that answer your question?" she asked teasingly. Telly was smiling back at her properly for the first time since she had been rescued from the Camarilla, and Sarah felt her breath hitch in her throat at the sight. "Yeah, I think so," Telly grinned. Sarah turned, putting her arm over Telly's shoulder to keep her close as they walked back to her room, relishing in the way that this time Telly didn't stiffen and pull away, but rather leaned in closer to her, looping her own arm around Sarah's back. "We will, of course, have to remain professional a lot of times," Sarah said, and she felt Telly nod against her. "But when it's just us, even if we are out in public, there won't be any need for us to hide our relationship. Not if everyone already knows." "Good," she heard Telly say. "I didn't like having to hide it." Sarah leaned down and pressed a kiss to the top of Telly's hair. "Neither did I." They made the rest of the way back to Sarah's room in a comfortable silence. Telly eyed Petra's room nervously as they walked by. Even though she knew that Petra now knew about her relationship with Sarah, running into the woman while walking into Sarah's bedroom wasn't something that she was exactly looking forward to. She hoped it was something that didn't happen anytime soon. Or ever. The door to Sarah's room closed behind them, and she sighed, finally feeling like she could fully relax. She felt Sarah's arms slip around her waist from behind, and she leaned backwards, resting her body against Sarah's sturdy frame. Her hands came up to cover Sarah's that were currently resting on her waist. "Are you okay?" The words were murmured into her scalp from where Sarah was pressing her face into the top of her head. Telly nodded. "Yeah, I think so." Sarah's arms tightened around her. "I'm just tired." Sarah hummed in response. "We can go to bed, if you like." Tally turned in Sarah's arms, forcing Sarah to lift her head and look at her. "Can I take a shower first? Like a really long, really hot shower?" Sarah chuckled softly, squeezing Tally's hips gently. "Of course. Do you want some clean clothes to wear to bed?" Tally's eyes lit up. "Your clothes? Yes, please." Sarah chuckled again, a deep, throaty noise that Tally smiled at, and Sarah kissed her before stepping away to rifle through her dresser. Tally stepped into the bathroom that was connected to Sarah's quarters and reached into the shower, turning the water on. She slowly slipped off Sarah's jacket and smiled as she neatly folded it and set it on the bathroom counter. "I'm guessing I can keep this," she called out. "My jacket." Sarah appeared in the doorway to the bathroom, holding a t-shirt and a pair of boxers in her hand. "Unfortunately not. That is my standard issue jacket. I do need it." She smiled at Tally's disappointed look. "I'm sure we could find another one of mine for you to steal, though," she teased. "Yeah?" Tally looked up at her hopefully. "You sure wouldn't mind?" Sarah set the clothing she had picked out for Tally down on top of the jacket and stepped further into the bathroom. She put her hands on Tally's hips and backed her up so that Tally was pressed against the counter, eyes wide. "I am very sure," she said, her voice lilting downward slightly. "I like seeing you in my clothing." Tally blushed prettily at that, hands going up to grab at Sarah's shoulders, palms spreading out over Sarah's arms. Okay, Sarah said teasingly back, kissing Tally once before pulling back. "Are you coming to bed after your shower?" Tally grabbed Sarah's face, pulling her back in for another, longer kiss. Sarah's hands went to her hips again, squeezing and digging her nails lightly into them. Tally's lips were firm against Sarah's, hands hot on her skin as she pressed her body fully into Sarah's. Sarah's breath was shaky as they pulled apart, and she had to force herself to loosen her grip on Tally's waist and step back when the kiss ended. She suddenly felt anxious, wanting to pull Tally into her arms and never let her go. But Tally was pulling her own hands away from Sarah and stepping away from the bathroom counter. "Yeah, I'm coming to bed after," Tally said. She pulled her shirt up and over her head, dropping it onto the floor. Sarah was unable to stop herself from stepping forward and wrapping her arms around Tally from behind, hands splaying over her stomach. The anxiety that she felt eased at the contact with Tally's warm skin, and she let out a steady breath, dropping a kiss to Tally's shoulder. "Don't take too long." She saw Tally bite her lip in the reflection of the mirror, ducking her head to hide her smile. "I won't." Sarah slowly let go of Tally and forced herself to leave the bathroom. The minute the door closed behind her, she felt the anxiety come back. She wasn't sure what it was that was making her so uneasy. Tally was safe. She knew that. She could hear the shower running in the room behind her, see Tally's boots that had been kicked off next to the door to her bedroom. She had spent all day with Tally. She didn't understand why she was shaking, why she could feel the uneasiness creep up her spine. She gritted her teeth, shaking her head as she quickly changed into sleepwear of her own and crawled into her bed. The normally soft sheets felt abrasive against her skin, and when she found her hands shaking, she cursed, tangling them into the blankets as she stared at the ceiling above her. Eventually, the sound of the shower stopped, and after a few more minutes, the door to the bathroom slowly opened. Sarah sat up, leaning back against the headboard, and the tightness in her chest seemed to ease fractionally when her eyes landed on Tally once again. She had chosen to forgo the boxers that Sarah had given her, wearing only the two big t-shirt with the logo long since faded, the shirt's hem stopping just below her hips. Without saying anything, Tally pulled the covers back to reveal Sarah's bare legs, and she hopped onto the bed, crawling over and climbing on top of Sarah's lap. There was something hidden in her brown eyes as she straddled Sarah's waist, knees bracketing Sarah. Her hands reached up to clutch at Sarah's shirt collar, and she leaned in closer, looking at Sarah with such raw emotion on her face that it made Sarah's heart clench. Sarah's hands immediately went to Tally, running them down her back. "What is it, love?" she asked softly. Tally's hands gripped tighter at Sarah's shirt collar, her knees pressing closer on either side of Sarah's waist. "I need you," she whispered. Her brown eyes looked at Sarah pleadingly. "I'm right here," Sarah soothed, but Tally shook her head at Sarah's words. Sarah frowned as Tally reached back and grabbed one of the hands that was resting on her back. Tally guided Sarah's hand to the front of her body and pressed it to her chest, directly over one of her breasts. "No, Sarah, I need you," she whispered again. She squeezed the hand holding Sarah's over her breast, and Sarah understood what she meant. "Okay," Sarah whispered, nodding. She palmed Tally's breast again, her other hands playing on Tally's back to support her as she leaned forward, spinning them both until Tally was flat on her back, Sarah's weight pressing her into the bed. Tally's oversized shirt was quickly removed, leaving her bare beneath Sarah, and Sarah quickly set about pressing kisses into Tally's neck and chest, softly stroking her hands up and down Tally's sides. The soft kisses turned into open-mouthed ones, Sarah's tongue licking over the sensitive skin around Tally's chest, teeth grazing over her collarbone and pulse point. Tally let out a breathy moan at the feeling, hands going up to tangle in Sarah's long hair, tugging slightly. She felt Sarah's mouth close around a nipple and suck, and she couldn't hold back the much louder moan that rose in her throat, feeling the rush of wet heat between her legs. Sarah pressed a kiss to her sternum, and there was another wetness, a drip onto Tally's chest, and her eyes fluttered open in confusion. Sarah had halted where she was, and Tally could feel her hands shaking from where they hovered just above her hips. She felt another drop of wetness on her chest, and her entire body went cold. Sarah was crying. She immediately sat up, hands disentangling from Sarah's hair to gently take her by the shoulders, and she coaxed Sarah into a sitting position with her. A silent sob left Sarah's body, and Tally's heart broke as Sarah turned away from her, bringing a hand up to her mouth. "Sarah?" Tally asked worriedly, scooting closer to her. She rested a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Sarah, what's wrong?" "I'm sorry," Sarah said, voice thick with tears, still facing away from Tally. "I just need a minute." "Sarah, we don't have to." Sarah sniffed, and she shook her head, bringing up a hand to roughly wipe away the tears that had fallen down her cheeks. "No, it's okay. You need me. I can." "Sarah, stop," Tally said firmly. She gently took Sarah's chin in her hand, turning the other woman's head so that she was looking at her. "I don't need or want you at the expense of yourself." She crawled forward a bit, putting one of her legs behind Sarah's back and the other one over her lap, wrapping her arms around Sarah tightly. "Just being here with you is enough." Another sob racked Sarah's body, and she leaned into Tally's touch, pressing her face into Tally's shoulder, arms going around Tally's middle to squeeze tightly. "I'm sorry," she whispered again. You don't need to apologize for this. Tally turned her head so that her cheek was pressed up against Sarah's hair. She could feel more tears dripping onto her shoulder. Just tell me what's wrong. Sarah was silent for a moment as she drew in a sharp breath, and Tally felt Sarah's fingers curl into her hips. I almost lost you. But you didn't, Tally said quickly, softly. I'm right here. I know. Sarah's voice was a low whisper against Tally's bare shoulder. But I almost did. They took you from me, and suddenly I was 17 again, afraid that I was going to lose the only family that I had left in the world. Tally's grip tightened on Sarah. I'm your family? Sarah drew in another long breath and lifted her head from Tally's shoulder to look at her properly. Tally reached up to wipe away Sarah's tears, and she felt Sarah lean in, resting their foreheads together. Yes, you are my family, and I almost lost you. I don't think, Sarah swallowed harshly, I don't think I could survive losing you. Her voice cracked as she finished speaking, and she felt more hot tears spill over onto her cheeks. You're my family too, Tally whispered back. Sarah let out another sob at Tally's words, and she felt Tally's arms tighten around her, drawing her closer. I'm right here, Sarah, Tally whispered into Sarah's hair. Her hand was rubbing in small circles on Sarah's back, holding the woman close to her as she cried. I'm okay. Tally held Sarah for a few more moments, letting the woman regain her composure, and eventually Sarah took a steadying breath, and she slowly sat up, wiping at her eyes again. I'm sorry, she apologized again. Her eyes were trained on a far corner of her room. You shouldn't have to see me like this. No, Tally said quickly. I want all of you, Sarah. She continued to run her hand up and down Sarah's back. You have been there for me so many times whenever I needed you. I want to be there for you whenever you need me. And I don't want some sanitized version of you that never allows yourself to be vulnerable around me. You don't have to be the general around me. You can just be Sarah. Sarah just nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and she looked up at the ceiling, taking another shaky breath. Tally's hand that wasn't on her back reached out and took Sarah's hand in her own. Tally began to slowly slide backwards on the bed, tugging Sarah's arm as she did so. Come here, she said softly. Sarah looked at her questioningly, cheeks still stained with tears, but she allowed herself to be pulled up along the bed, towards Tally. Tally's head hit the pillow, and when Sarah followed her up towards the front of the bed, Tally gently took Sarah's head in her hands and placed it on her chest, feeling the weight of Sarah's body press up against the side of her. She ran her fingers through Sarah's soft hair, feeling Sarah drape an arm over her stomach, curling her fingers into her side. Sarah could hear the thrum of Tally's heartbeat in her ear, echoing with her own and making it easier to breathe. Tally was here, underneath her, warm and alive and comforting Sarah, when Sarah should be the one holding her, stroking her hair, telling her that it was going to be okay. But Sarah couldn't bring herself to lift her head from Tally's chest, to stop herself from hearing the rhythmic beat of Tally's heart, the sign to her that Tally was here, that Tally was okay, that she was alive. Can we stay like this? She heard herself ask. Yes, Tally said. Her hand continued to run through Sarah's hair, to stroke firmly down her back. We can't stay like this. They woke up late the next morning. Tally stretched, feeling Sarah sleeping soundly pressed up against her, and turned to sleepily look at the clock on the wall. licking her dry lips. It was almost third bell. Tally's entire body stiffened, her muscles tensing with adrenaline. "Shit!" she yelped. Sarah jerked awake next to her, hand automatically reaching out for Tally. "What's wrong?" Her voice was still husky with sleep, but clearly concerned. "It's almost third bell. I'm going to be so late," Tally said. She leapt out of bed with a panic and began looking for her clothes. Sarah groaned and rolled over to look at the clock. "Shit." She draped an arm over her eyes against the morning sun that was seeping into the room through the blinds, not moving as Tally frantically gathered up her clothing and threw it on haphazardly. She sat up with a groan, the blankets rolling off her chest, and was greeted by Tally, clothes wrinkled and hair unbrushed, leaning towards her. A quick kiss was pressed to Sarah's lips, one she barely had any time to return, before Tally was turning away, eyes wide. "I'm sorry. I'm gonna be so late. I love you." She took 2 steps away from Sarah's bed before she turned back around, swallowing Sarah's words with another kiss. Sarah's hand flew up to catch Tally by the back of the neck, holding her close for a moment, ensuring that she could properly kiss Tally back this time. She felt Tally grin against her lips before she pulled away. "I love you too," Sarah said, hand dropping from Tally's neck. Tally caught it and quickly pressed a kiss to Sarah's palm before flashing her a grin. "I'll see you later," Tally breathed out with a smile, and then she turned and bolted out of the room. She closed the door to Sarah's room, ensuring it clicked in place, when she heard the slam of another door behind her. Tally stiffened, her hand still on the doorknob, frozen in place. She could tell just from where the noise came from behind her that it had been the door to Petra's room, and she could feel someone standing behind her, staring at her. "Shit," Tally said again, a whisper this time. She swallowed and slowly turned around, face already heating up. Any and all embarrassment at Petra spotting her leaving Sarah's room vanished in the blink of an eye, and Tally's jaw dropped at the woman standing outside of Petra's room, eyes wide and looking nervous. "Nikta?" Tally's voice was shrill. Hey, Red," Nikta said, wiping her palms on her pants. Tally had never seen her look so uncomfortable. Nikta reached up to scratch at her neck awkwardly, shifting her weight back and forth between her legs. Tally's eyes followed Nikta's hand up to her neck, and her eyes bulged when she spotted a purple bruise on Nikta's neck. "Are those teeth marks?" Tally thought hysterically. She suddenly felt lightheaded. "I'm going to be late for third bell," she blurted out, unable to take her eyes off the hickey on Nikta's neck. She didn't wait for an answer as she tore away from Nikta, but a cold hand reached out and grabbed her by the wrist, halting her progress. "Tally," Nikta said tightly. Her voice was strained, entire body tense. "Don't tell Abigail." Her dark eyes bore into Tally's. "Please." Tally's eyes flicked to the mark on Nikta's neck again. "For God's sake, Red, stop looking at it," Nikta snapped, dropping Tally's wrist as if it had burned her. "Sorry," Tally squeaked out. She forced herself to look Nikta in the eyes. "I won't tell her." She shook her head, eager to leave this uncomfortable situation as soon as possible. "Promise." Nikta seemed to relax fractionally at that, but she was still bouncing back and forth between her legs, a nervous energy still about her. Good. The two of them stared at each other. "You're gonna be late," Nikta offered, voice still strained. Tally's eyes widened again. "Yup, I'm gonna go now, and pretend I never saw you, or that mark on your neck." Tally's eyes were drawn back to it as she spoke. "Red," Nikta hissed. "Sorry," Telly pivoted her body away from Nicta to forcibly remove her eyes from it. "I'll be seeing you later." Telly tore off down the hall. Nicta groaned inwardly. Goddess, I really hope not.
Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.